So thank you for being here by we are what we are because we have the support of the industry. And what I'm going to do over the next maybe 20 minutes or so is to give you my perspective of what I think are some changes which are happening in the chemical space. I'm happy to take some questions probably as after the presentation. So I think the first point I want to stress is essentially for people who are outside of this industry that this is a very vital industry. It's not something which is very well recognized. So we know that, we in the industry think that we are very important, but larger society doesn't seem to recognize the key role played by the chemical industry. And that is a problem. And that is a problem because, people are suspicious of us. People think we don't matter. There are calls for banning chemicals, getting rid of chemicals, no units near my premises, etc., etc. So what I've done on the left side, you can see a chart which looks at the chemicals as a percentage of material inputs which go into manufacture a whole lot of stuff, and you can see that the iPhones and the electronics that we all hold in our hands is all possible because of inputs from the chemical industry. And sometimes it's not very obvious because the chemical industry is essentially an industry for industries. With very little, a paint is really 100% all chemicals, The industry is also important because it is a contribution, makes a significant contribution to the economy. In terms of the exports that it does, in terms of the jobs it creates, in terms of the value added in manufacturing that it does. So it's a significant industry for India, and it is a significant industry for the world as well. So the point of all of this is that we matter and we need to be taken very seriously, and governments do recognize the importance of this industry. Let me just turn to some of the concerns that government has. If you talk to people in the ministries involved, you come across some themes which are increasingly being heard. There is first a lot of talk today about the rising trade deficit in chemicals. And this has happened because we have not scaled up the level of investments in chemical manufacture in the country at the pace at which demand has grown. So what has happened as a consequence is that our import levels have risen. And if you look at over the last 5-6 years, almost the entire growth in demand has been taken over by imports, which is understandable as a matter of, as a strategic. If you say that this industry is very important and you're going to be largely dependent on imports, there is a vulnerability which is there. And this vulnerability is particularly worrisome in terms of industries such as pharmaceuticals, agrochemicals, inputs that go into making all of that. It is even more worrying because we are largely dependent on one country, China, for many of these inputs. And then you have got issues related to supply chain security, delays, disruptions, price escalations, non-availability, all of that. And this is a concern not just in India. Now it's now become in the post-COVID world. This has now become a concern for the rest of the world as well. Okay, so there is concern there. The other big concern that they have in government today, again, an international trend, mirroring an international trend, is the safety of the chemicals which are in use today. And frankly, in an Indian context, many people don't even know what are the chemicals in use today. The universe is so large today. So there is, in some sense, a fear that there are things out there which we don't know, which are not really very safe to use. So the need for chemicals regulation is also now being increasingly talked about. The third aspect, and probably the one which has gained a lot of momentum in the last few years, is the sustainability related issues related to the chemical industry, particularly the issues of impact on the environment, impact on human and animal health, and also now increasingly the carbon footprint of the industry. There's a lot of efforts in decarbonization of the industry, And there are several efforts ongoing in that direction. So these are just some things that I thought I should flag for you, because a lot of policy decisions are now based on some of these concerns that the government has. I talked about the trade deficit in chemicals, but it's not all bad news. There are some sectors of the chemical industry in which India is a net exporter. And we know those industries. We know the industries like the dyes and colorants, the dyes and the pigments, and the intermediates industries. We know some of the industries such as the fragrance and flavors, the agrochemical industry, the pharma industry, APIs or even finished formulations. We export more than we import. Although we import a fair bit, we export a little bit more. So, but overall, if you look at the trade deficit in chemicals, it's roughly of the order of about $15 billion. And today, India's chemical imports only rank behind oil, gold, and consumer electronics. So it's a very, very large chunk of imports which take place. So there is a lot of talk now on what do we do to attract investments into the country, and the government has a few levers that it can use to help these things happen. And one of the things that we always lament about is the state of the infrastructure and the need to improve that. In the chemical context, the infrastructure improvement really focuses on creating dedicated zones for chemical manufacture. Today, I think that is something which we have failed to do as a country, and I think that's one of the big lacunae in our development of the industry. The industry has come about kind of willy-nilly wherever it wanted, in kind of unplanned manner. And that has also happened in other countries. That happened in China as well. But China has seen a very radical transformation, which is still ongoing on how that industry is now reorganizing, etc. So clear zoning, creation of industrial clusters far away from residential areas, etc., is something that is needed. So we had something called the PCPIR policy, which led to the creation of the first PCPIR was at Dahej, built around the Opal petrochemical cracker, and then other units gravitating around it with feedstock supply from these mother units. So you have a whole ecosystem of chemical manufacture coming up. So the idea is to have value chain development. So you take feedstocks coming in from some of these big plants, and then build on them, build value chains on them. And I think that is an exercise which is now ongoing. You must have seen recently there has been some announcement by IOC that they will be putting up a naphtha cracker at Paradeep in Orissa, adjoining to their refinery. So that is going to make a lot of feedstocks which will be available for the downstream chemical industry to value add upon. So the plan as it should be would be that chemical units co-locate around this cluster, and a new cluster of efficient manufacturing, safe manufacturing is born. The business of ease of doing business, I think there is a lot. I don't have to stress that. The clearances issue is something that is a big problem for the industry. To the government's credit, there have been some initiatives taken in order to improve that ease. So today, many states are now permitting you to start the process of construction without having an environmental clearance, and so the two go along. So you don't have to wait for EC to come before you start the building process, etc. I think the government needs to realize that while the deviant manufacturers, the abusive manufacturers need to be punished, you also need to make sure that you don't, compromise the efficiencies and the performance of some of the units who are complying with this thing. The other thing which is now a fair bit in the news is what are called production-linked incentives. You have seen announcements from the government that they are planning production-linked incentives for several industries. Of concern to us are the incentives which have already been rolled out for manufacturing of several APIs, raw materials to make pharma inputs, some drug intermediates, etc., has already been rolled out, and it has seen some positive impacts. There are several projects for some of these intermediates and APIs which are now in advanced stage. A few have even been commissioned, and so that has been rolled out. There is a talk of a production-linked incentive scheme for the chemical industry specifically, broad-based chemical industry, and I'll come to that in a minute. One of the things I think there has been a lot of pressure on the government also to tinker with import tariffs, etc., to kind of aid the domestic industry manufacturing. So one has to be very careful about doing this, in my view at least, because if you selectively tinker with import tariffs, then you can really mess things up. You can shift imports upstream or you can shift imports downstream. And I think in many of the downstream sectors of the chemical industry is where India's true competitiveness lies. So if you threaten their raw materials with higher feedstock, etc., you risk compromising their competitiveness, particularly in the export market. So one has to be very, very careful when you do that. The production-linked incentive scheme is now in the process of being evaluated by the government. In principle, there is a green signal. The Department of Chemicals and Petrochemicals and the Ministry of Chemicals is in charge of this. They have presented a list to the government. They have presented a list to the PMO. The PMO's office has reverted back saying that we need some independent validation of the items selected, etc. So they have come to experts in the industry. They came to us. They came to some other people, and they wanted some kind of validation that these are the lists that we should be having. Some comments have been received on all of this, and you can imagine that when something like this is thrown up, there are all kinds of demands. I mean, everybody wants the kind of products that they are making to be on those lists, but we are progressing in that direction. So far as things currently stand, and this can change. I mean, there are about 40 chemicals which have been identified for this PLI scheme. About 8 go into the pharma industry, 7 go into the agrochemical industry, about 20 are multi-purpose chemicals which go across several industries, and 5 go for dyes and pigments. Now, the idea here is that anybody creating capacity would get production-linked incentives for a fixed period of time, I think about 5 years. And the budget outlay is now about 5,000 crores. So the projects are, I expect that in a few months we will see announcements of projects, invitation of bids from the industry to come, and the process will come through. I just, there is some pressure to even accommodate some bulk commodity chemicals into this list, but I don't think it would happen because these projects are large. And even if you support one of them, it can pretty much eat the entire budget of this whole exercise. So the ideal scenario would be that this supports chemicals that go into value chain builds where India can be truly very competitive globally. So I think on self-reliance, I just have some points I think we need to keep in mind that while it sounds very nice. Self-reliance is not always possible. No country in the world makes everything that it needs, and there are some very, very good reasons why we don't do what we don't do. So we need to be very careful that we don't end up supporting industries where we don't have the competitiveness for various reasons. So I think that needs to be kept in mind. I want to quickly move to the subject of safety of chemicals in commerce. I think I touched upon this point right in the beginning, and I think there is now an understanding that chemicals are everywhere, and we don't know what is out there, and we need to know what is out there, and we need to have some kind of a regulation which will at least keep us aware of what is in use, where it is in use, how much is in use, is it safe in that use. Do alternatives exist? Do we need to go to those alternatives? Do we need bans? Do we need authorizations? Do we need restrictions? I mean, all kinds of things are being now, talked about. There was an argument in the past that if society is to benefit from some of the inputs that the chemical industry makes, it must also share some of the risks. No longer. I mean, I think nobody accepts that argument anymore. They want a cleaner world. They want a greener world. They want a safer world. Regulation is addressing some of that. So there is now a plan to put in place what is called chemical management rules. There have been some broad contours of what this will look like. This call for notification, which is in the first most basic thing would be that you will need to tell government what is it that you make. It need not be anything more than just a caste number or and a residential and a proof of where you make it, etc. But at more advanced stages, depending on the chemical and the kind of impacts that it has on human health and the environment, which you need to prove. It's not on government to disprove. You will need to prove the safety. There could be some kind of a registration, etc. So as you can guess, this is a fairly complex exercise. I mean, many of you are aware of the European REACH regulations, which is an extremely complex piece of legislation, but it's a reality today. I mean, the industry has learned to live with it. I mean, they went into REACH kicking and screaming that this can't be done, this is too expensive, I'll go out of business, etc. But by and large, at least Europe and the people who do business in Europe today accept it as a way of doing business. I mean, if you want to be in that market, you have to comply with the needs of that market. So I think legislation is coming. I have no idea what the timelines are because this has been going on for some time. I think eventually we will see some kind of policy put in place. It's going to be an expensive exercise. It needs to be funded. It needs to be funded partly by government, but industry will probably end up bearing some of those costs as well. So I mean, and there are concerns about the industry related to the confidentiality of the data that you submit, etc. But all of these are addressable issues. I don't think it is anything which is going to be a deal breaker that the industry cannot put up with. So we will have something. What it will also do, I think especially for some of the specialty chemical and some of the formulation industries, such as let's say personal care or agrochemicals, the palette of ingredients that are available for you to play around with in your formulations, etc., may shrink. So you will have to re-engineer some of these products, and I've given some examples of some of the products that we need to do. So, for example, in the case of PVC additives, stabilizers for PVC, there's a lot of lead which is now being used in India, which has been phased out almost everywhere else in the world. Substitutes are available. They are usually more expensive. They're usually not as efficient, but those things need to be worked around with by good formulation engineering and practices. So we will see some churn, some impacts on the downstream industries, but that is the reality of the business. And I can't say all this will happen in 2023. This will probably spill over well into next year, etc. But I think companies who are looking ahead need to be cognizant of some of these changes. I talked to you about the sustainability related issues into the industry, and I think it is fair to say that for many reasons, including sometimes our own behavior, we are viewed with suspicion by the government. Despite the importance, they recognize that this chemical industry is important, but you read about these accidents that happen, the plants that blow up, people dying, the fires that happen, etc. This raises concern amongst the government. So the chemical regulation that they're talking about is also looking to address some of the safety concerns as well. There are international best practices which are available. Responsible care is one of them. The Indian Chemical Council is leading that initiative. But it has been adopted by mainly the larger companies in the space. So where does the smaller SME segments go? And what kind of support, etc., that they need in order to be able to uplift their standards is something for which I don't have answers. The government, to its credit, is also now coming around to the idea that we need to discriminate between the good, the bad, and the ugly. not tar everybody with the same brush. So if you are a responsible care company, OSHA 14,000, whatever, you can get speedy clearance. You don't have to go every year for approval, renewals, etc. So those mechanisms are being put in place, and I think that's a good time. So policy, some of these shifts have been largely driven by industry lobbying, and I think that is good. Industry is getting a little more organized and communicating the legitimate demands that it has, and I think that is good for the industry as well. So that's my presentation. Just some broad takeaways. The continued engagement with government, I think, is very, very important for this industry, and I think sometimes we get lost in talking in different voices. So if you take the pesticide industry, for example, they've got 3 or 4 industry associations. If you take the pharma industry, they've got 4 industry associations. So sometimes they talk very different languages, and then the government gets confused as to who they should be listening to. So the easiest thing is not to do anything. Let the status quo prevail. So I think some of those issues need to be addressed. I think the industry must also be forceful in communicating its vitality and its importance to the larger community. We have failed to do that. We talk amongst ourselves. I tell you, you tell your friends in the industry, etc. But how do we communicate to larger audience? The lay persons, your children at home, how many of them want to come into this industry and work? So how many engineers want to come into this industry and serve this industry? If this industry is to grow at 10%, 12% that we all talk about, we all aspire, where is it going to get the manpower that needs to drive all that? So I was at a talk at IIT Bombay about 3 weeks back in the chemical engineering department, and a class of 100. I said, how many of you would work in this industry if you got the salaries that Infosys paid you? And I think there were about 5 people in the audience who raised their hand. Okay, so these are larger issues that we need to do. I think the improving the safety profile, there has to be a lot of effort which is needed beyond the top 200, 300 chemical companies in the country. And I think that is going to be the principal challenge that we have. No country in the world, aside of China, probably has the kind of industry structure that we do. So our problems are unique. The models that have worked elsewhere in the world may not necessarily work for us. So we have to find solutions internally out here. We could look at China for some of the solutions that they have implemented, but I think a lot of it has to be coming from the industry and the industry thought leaders who are here. So that's my presentation. My thanks to all of you for being here. I'm glad that there are more people here at the end of my presentation than at the beginning. It is hopefully to hear the next speaker speak. It's probably not to hear me speak. But thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, I think we have probably another 4 or 5 minutes, and I'm happy to address them. Yeah. So thank you very much.
So I think you mentioned initially in your presentation about like decarbonization efforts for the chemical industry. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I know that like leads to an added cost, right? And I'm not sure, I'm just trying to understand whether people are either saying that they will pay a premium for decarbonized chemicals, or whether it's actually turning out to be a competitive advantage in the space. Like that's my question.
There is obviously going to be higher costs involved in doing some of the things. I mean, there are various strategies for decarbonization, but one thing common amongst all of them is that the elevated cost structure elevates. So your question is, where is the economic justification for doing this going to come? So I think it can come from the carrot and it can come from the stick. So let's take the stick first. Let's say you have a tax on carbon, which is now kind of coming to be a reality. Europe has already levied a border tax on carbon, even not just on the carbon that the companies internally produce, but even on imported goods which come into the country. Chemicals have so far been excluded from the list. But some of the larger volume subsectors of the chemical industry, like fertilizers, are already part of it. Cement is part of it. So there is I definitely see the chemical industry also being part of this ecosystem once in a matter of time. It's just a matter of when, not if. Okay, so there is going to be a penalty on carbon that you will have to bear. So if you are doing things the conventional way. The other is what kind of incentives can be provided. The incentives can come from two sets of people. One, it can come from your customers, and it can come by way of mandates. Okay, so mandates are also very much a possibility. There are all kinds of mandates now which are being put into place. For example, in the fuels, you have got a mandate now to blend 10% alcohol into gasoline. It will eventually go to 20%, etc., which creates a market for itself. Then there are companies who are progressively minded. One hopes that that tribe will increase, but those are the companies that will need to, you will have to deal with them in order to benefit from some of the premiums they are willing to pay. Not always easy, depends on the sector that you are talking about, but there are some subsectors. Consumer-facing companies, at least in the developed world, are now increasingly under pressure to show that they are green, clean, etc., etc. So their procurement practices are also changing. Are they willing to pay a premium for every product that they are procuring because it is green? The answer is mostly in the no, but one hopes that over time this will change.
So my question is related to the talent challenge that you pointed out, that if the industry has to grow, then the talent acquisition and attracting young engineers would be very much important. So why is that a challenge? Because you also mentioned that even if people are willing to match, say, the salary with a competitive employer, even then the interest levels are low. So why is that the case, and what can be done to address that?
So I think the public perception of this industry is poor. And it even relates to many of the people in the audience possibly who have got children who don't want to be part of this industry. I can speak for myself. So the public perception of this industry is a problem which needs to be grappled with. One. Number two, the fact is that the most manufacturing industries, and certainly the chemical industry, cannot pay the kind of salaries that the new gen engineers expect. And there are other pools which are attracting them. Okay, so that is a reality that is not going to go away. So we will have to live with that. So what can the industry do? And what is the industry doing? They are not necessarily going to the IITs and the ICTs to look at their talent. They are looking to tier 2, tier 3 institutions in other parts of the country, and looking at the talent there, which brings a problem of quality, which you will have to internally address by setting up the kind of quality training systems that you probably didn't have. So there is that I think is probably the answer to this issue. So it's not just the availability per se of engineers or chemists, etc. It is the kind of quality that you need. You thought you could get it ready, but it is not coming, so you will have to invest in making it ready through internal systems.
Thank you for such a wonderful introduction to this session. So my question is around, I've been reading your point of views for almost a year now. So in your ChemicalWeekly magazines, you've always mentioned that in the last few years we've seen a trend of a lot of oil marketing companies getting a little jittery on what the future is going to be for them, and hence now you've seen a lot of diversion towards petrochemicals, starting with Indian oil, right? My question is, from just a 10 to 15 year perspective, if you're seeing a lot of these bulk sort of chemicals start coming into the system, and at the same time you're seeing a non-fossil fuel chain, which is a bio-based chain, if the bulk chemicals start coming in, would that mean downstream you're becoming basically cheaper, and at the same time you're trying to compete, the diversion between the price of bio-based and fossil fuel-based would increase, and that may sort of impair the rate of adoption of bio? I mean, I'm just trying to think out loud. Could that be a case?
So we are seeing now a fundamental shift in the way a barrel of oil is consumed. Okay, so you're going to see over the next 15 years, etc., the fuel usage, particularly for segments like automobile, decrease, and the proportion that needs to be utilized for other applications, mainly petrochemical manufacture, will increase. So refiners are doing what are called oil to chemical shifts. Now, bear in mind that a typical refinery is sized 10 times larger than a typical petrochemical plant. Ballpark. Million ton cracker versus a 15 million ton refinery. So, 10, 15x. So, when these monsters get into chemicals, the kind of flows that will come into the chemical industry will completely alter the dynamics of the standalone chemical units making some of those bulk chemicals. That is a threat which is already being manifest. The largest oil to chemical complexes today are being built in China, and they are focused on aromatics, xylenes, for example, largely to feed the polyester value chain. One of those plants each one of them is about 4 million tons. That kind of competitiveness with that kind of scale is going to be very hard to meet. So for one, the world will need less of those plants because there is obviously a market demand limitation, and not everybody can do this. So there will be a huge concentration of supply. Now, as far as the bio-based is concerned, we are really talking about downstream. In these commodity space, I don't see a very large change in the near future. When I say near 10, 15 year future of bio-based chemicals taking over from petroleum-based feedstocks. More and more of chemicals will go into bulk chemicals, but the downstream value chains where the builds happen, there will be some competing feedstocks which will come in, some of it being bio-based. There is also increasing realization that we need to recycle more, at least from a material standpoint. So at least plastics, etc. There's a lot of recycling efforts which are on. So there is old carbon coming back. It doesn't always have to be. So the idea is to get to carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality can come from biomass. It can come from recycling also. So all of these will kind of play out in the future. The roadmap is extremely complex. Most people don't know where it is headed, but they are just feeling their way through the whole thing.